The first thing Claire Bennett noticed was the silence after his question. It was the kind of silence that feels loud, the kind that tells you something important just happened even if you don't understand it yet. The community center hallway was nearly empty, lights buzzing softly overhead, folding chairs stacked against the wall. Outside, cars passed on Main Street, unaware that a quiet life had just tilted. He asked me to teach him, Claire would later think. Just not what I expected. Claire was 36, divorced, and careful with her world. She lived in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, where life followed routines and people preferred things simple. She taught evening classes in communication and writing for adults who wanted to improve their confidence. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it gave her purpose. That Tuesday night had started like any other. She ended the class, answered a few questions, smiled politely, and packed her bag. She was already thinking about dinner and an early night when she heard her name. Claire. She turned and saw Ethan Walker standing a few feet away. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention. Early40s.com voice, neatly dressed, wedding ring always in place. He attended her class regularly, always on time, always respectful. He listened more than he spoke. Claire remembered noticing that the first week how he paid attention in a way that felt rare. Yes, she said. He hesitated, then said, "Do you have a moment?" She checked the empty hallway and nodded. Sure. That was when he said it. I was hoping you could teach me something, Ethan said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. Something personal. Claire smiled gently. If it's about the class, I can help. He shook his head. It's not about writing. She waited. I don't understand my own life anymore, he continued. I don't know when it stopped feeling like mine. I thought maybe you could help me understand what I'm missing. The words hit her harder than she expected. Claire had heard many confessions over the years. People opened up when they felt safe. Still, this felt different. More exposed. More dangerous. She knew Ethan was married. He talked about his wife Laura in neutral terms. Grocery lists, busy schedules. Nothing warm, nothing cruel. Just distance wrapped in politeness. I'm not sure I'm the right person for that, Claire said carefully. I understand, he replied quickly. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I just need someone who listens without judging. That should have been her moment to step away, to keep the line clear and firm. Instead, she said, maybe we can talk for a few minutes. Public place. Nothing complicated. They met at a small cafe near the center. Bright lights, open space, the safety of strangers nearby. Claire told herself it was harmless. Two adults talking. Nothing more. Ethan spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. He talked about his job, his marriage, the feeling of moving through days without being fully present. He didn't blame his wife. He didn't paint himself as a victim. He simply described the emptiness. I wake up, he said, staring into his coffee, and I feel like I'm playing a role one once chose but no longer recognize. Claire listened, nodding, asking small questions. She noticed how icily he opened up, how his shoulders relaxed when she responded, how his eyes stayed on her face, not in an inappropriate way, but with attention that felt intimate. She told herself it was just conversation. Still, when he said, talking to you makes me feel clear, her chest tightened. Claire shared very little about herself. She mentioned her divorce briefly, the loneliness afterward, the slow rebuilding. Ethan listened the same way she did, quiet, focused, sincere. When they stood to leave, the moment lingered. Thank you, he said, for listening. Of course, she replied. But Ethan, be careful, smiled. A sad, understanding smile. I know. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She replayed the conversation, analyzing every word, every pause. She told herself she had done nothing wrong. She hadn't crossed any lines. Yet something felt unsettled. She had recognized something in Ethan's story, herself. The next few weeks passed quickly. Claire focused on work, on friends, on keeping her life steady. Ethan remained polite and distant in class, as if the coffee meeting had never happened. Then one evening, after class, he walked beside her toward the exit. "I didn't mean to make things uncomfortable," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say that talking to you helped more than I expected." Claire stopped walking. "That's what worries me," she admitted. He nodded. "It worries me too. They didn't make plans. They didn't exchange long messages. And yet, the connection stayed alive, unspoken, like a low hum beneath everything else." One afternoon, Claire received a short message from him. "I'm trying to understand myself better. I won't ask for more. I just wanted to thank you." She stared at the screen longer than necessary. She typed back, "Understanding yourself is important. Just make sure it doesn't hurt anyone, including me," she thought, but didn't write. Days later, they ran into each other at the grocery store. The meeting was accidental, but the moment felt intentional. They talked between aisles about simple things, weather, work, nothing deep. And yet the space between them felt charged. Claire realized then that this wasn't about what they were doing. It was about what they were becoming. She began to notice changes in herself. She smiled more during the day. She thought about conversations that hadn't happened yet. She caught herself wondering how Ethan was feeling, what he was thinking. The awareness frightened her. One evening after class, Ethan finally said what both of them had been avoiding. "I never meant to put you in this position," he said. "I didn't expect to feel this way." Claire felt her throat tighten. Neither did I. They stood there, not touching, not confessing anything clearly defined. Yet everything was clear. "I think," Ethan said softly, "I wasn't asking you to teach me a skill." She met his eyes. "I think you were asking me to remind you who you are," she said. He exhaled slowly. Yes, that was the moment Claire understood the truth. This wasn't harmless conversation. This wasn't innocent connection. It was the beginning of something that could change lives in ways they couldn't control. She stepped back. "This can't continue," she said, even though her voice shook. "Not like this." Ethan nodded, pain visible but contained. "I know." They parted that night without promises, without closure. But the question he had asked remained with her, echoing in the quiet of her home. He had asked her to teach him. And now she realized the lesson had already begun, one neither of them was ready for. Because once two people see each other this clearly, going back to silence is never easy. And this was only the beginning. Claire didn't expect to hear from him again. Not so soon, not after she had told herself it was over. But the message arrived one chilly Thursday evening, buzzing quietly on her phone. "I don't want to cross a line. I just need to understand why I feel more alive talking to you than anywhere else." Her heart skipped not from desire, but from the weight of recognition. She knew that feeling all too well. That quiet pull, the one that made logic waver. She stared at the message for several minutes, debating. She could ignore it. She could reply politely and shut the door. But curiosity and the unresolved tension between them pulled her in. Slowly, carefully, she typed, "Honesty is powerful, but it has consequences." She pressed send before she could overthink. They agreed to meet again, in the same quiet cafe where the first real conversation had happened. Public enough to be safe, private enough to speak freely. When she walked in, Ethan was already there, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, eyes fixed on the window as if he was seeing the world differently through it. When he saw her, he stood, smiled faintly, and gestured to the chair opposite him. The conversation began cautiously, like two dancers testing the rhythm before committing to the steps. He spoke about regrets, about choices made too quickly, about the slow fading of joy in a life that looked perfect on the surface. Claire listened, heart tightening, noticing the subtle ways his hands trembled when he tried to smile, the way his voice caught on certain words. It was as if he was sharing pieces of himself that he had never given anyone else. "You don't have to answer," Ethan said suddenly, "but why do I feel seen by you? Why does talking to you feel like coming home?" Claire felt the same pull. She had been careful for so long, guarding herself against emptiness, against disappointment. And yet, here it was again, that dangerous familiarity. "Because we're honest," she said simply, "and honesty is rare." They spoke for hours, though the cafe emptied around them. Hours of confessions without confession, hours of connection without touching. She noticed her pulse quicken at the sound of his laughter, even at the softest jokes. She noticed how he listened when she spoke. Really listened, not just waiting for a turn to talk. And she realized with sudden clarity how starved both of them had been for attention that mattered. Days passed and messages trickled in. Short, careful, filled with thought, but never overstepping. Claire kept her boundaries firm, reminding herself of the rules she had set. She reminded herself of Laura, the wife she had never met, but whose life existed parallel to their own. She reminded herself that the emotional closeness she felt was a dangerous game. Yet despite all reminders, she found herself thinking about him when she shouldn't. In the grocery store, she caught herself scanning for him. At home, she replayed conversations in her head, analyzing every laugh, every pause, every glance. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was their slow infiltration of the heart. One evening, Ethan sent another message. "I'm trying to understand myself. I won't ask for more, but I need to know if this part of me is still alive." Claire stared at the screen long after reading it. That part of him, the honest, unguarded part, was the part she recognized. The part that reminded her of the person she had once been before life's responsibilities and heartbreak had hardened her. They met again. This time, the air was heavier, filled with unspoken words. They talked about fear, about choices, about the possibility of waking up one day and realizing they had lived someone else's life. There was no touching, no promises, only a quiet acknowledgement of the connection that neither could ignore. Claire realized she had changed. She laughed more freely, felt her heart stir in unexpected ways, and even noticed the small joys of life with more intensity. And yet that change frightened her. The closeness, the awareness, the longing was all a double-edged sword. She knew that what she felt for Ethan could never exist openly, could never cross into anything more than careful conversation. Then one evening, in a cafe that had become their unspoken meeting spot, Ethan spoke words that shifted everything. "I'm not asking you to replace my life," he said quietly. "I just needed to know if this part of me was still real." Claire's throat tightened. She understood immediately. She wasn't a solution. She wasn't a distraction. She was a mirror. And mirrors are dangerous when they show you what is missing in your own life, while reminding you of what you cannot have. That night, Claire made a decision. It was the hardest she had faced in years, yet the clearest. She told Ethan she couldn't meet him anymore. Not because the feelings weren't real they were, but because their honesty. Their connection was something that belonged to no one but themselves. "I won't be the lesson that costs someone else their peace," she said, voice steady despite the tremor inside. Ethan didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply nodded, eyes heavy with understanding. "Thank you," he said. "You taught me more than you know." They parted without closure, without certainty, without any false comfort. Yet Claire felt a quiet relief. There was grief in walking away, but also freedom, the freedom to honor boundaries. To respect lives that weren't hers to touch, and to let the lessons they had shared shape them individually. Weeks passed. Claire returned to her routines, standing before her new classes with renewed purpose. The longing didn't vanish completely, but she learned to accept it, to hold it gently without letting it define her. She noticed small joys again, like the smell of rain on warm pavement, the laughter of a student who had finally gained confidence, or the quiet satisfaction of a completed day. Ethan, too, moved forward. He faced his life with a new honesty, realizing that the pieces of himself he had sought externally had always existed within, waiting to be acknowledged. He worked to reconnect with his own feelings, his marriage, and his responsibilities, learning to be present without relying on someone else to illuminate the path. The story of Claire and Ethan never became one of romance in the traditional sense. There were no stolen kisses, no promises, no happily ever after. Instead, it became a story of emotional awakening, of boundaries respected, of connection that taught rather than consumed. They had shared something rare in unspoken understanding, an emotional mirror. a gentle awakening that left both altered yet free. Claire sometimes thought about Ethan and wondered if he felt the same quiet shift she did. That subtle change in perspective that lingered long after the conversation ended. But she also knew that growth sometimes meant walking away from what feels compelling, from what feels necessary to protect the lives of everyone involved. In the end, they had learned the same lesson without losing themselves or harming others. Some connections aren't meant to last forever. Some moments exist to remind us of what we are capable of feeling, of seeing, of understanding. And sometimes letting go is the most profound act of care, not just for someone else, but for yourself. Claire walked through her town with a newfound steadiness. Life continued. Hope continued. And the lessons lingered quietly, shaping her without pain, shaping him without loss. Shaping both of them in ways that mattered more than any fleeting romance could have. And though the story ended without resolution in the traditional sense, it ended with clarity. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about recognizing truth, accepting boundaries, and carrying the lesson forward. That was the story of Claire and Ethan's story of awakening, of longing, of connection that taught, transformed, and ultimately let go. A story that reminded them both that some lessons aren't meant to be shared forever. They are meant to change you on, then set you free.